Hello, welcome to this video on the 10 classes of verbs in Pali. And in this video we simply map the different forms of the Pali verb onto the 10 Sanskrit classes. I appreciate, of course, there's more than one way of enumerating the so-called classes of verbs in Pali. Several authors and grammarians have done it in different ways. In my experience, the most convenient is simply to map the Pali ones onto the Sanskrit. That's what Perniola does in his excellent grammar. Other grammarians have done it as well. You'll find several different schemes of doing this. And I choose this one simply because, in my experience, it's the most practical and the most convenient. It also, like so many other cases, helps you to understand Pali if you can see how things emerge, or how things not always emerge from, but compare with the much more regular and orderly way that things are done in Sanskrit. I would like you to, before going through this video, you should have seen the previous video, that's 124 A and B, about the 10 classes of verbs in Sanskrit, because this will not be readily comprehensible unless you have that. I'll be following the exposition here given in Perniola. Perniola is available online, and I've put the link in my resources sheet. You'll find it under section 771, grammars and dictionaries. Let me enlarge this for you. And you'll see down here under Pali grammars, Vita Perniola Pali grammar. I won't call it up on the screen now. I'll be working from my hard copy of the book. Those of you who want to follow, I do recommend that you have Perniola with you. And also Macdonnell, of course, from the previous video dealing with the Sanskrit side of it. I won't be going through Perniola in detail. The purpose of this is a general overview, so that you have, as it were, the map, so that when I talk about budjati is budjati because it's a class 4 verb, and bud, class 4 verb in Sanskrit, then you'll know what I mean. Budhyati in Sanskrit, budjati in Pali, and so on. And ati is, you see, well, it's a class 2 verb in Sanskrit. Asti, with the t joined directly to the root, asti becomes ati in Pali. Here we are then. So I will now proceed with this exposition, brief overview exposition of the Pali verbs in the 10 classes. Right, here we go then. Start off with class 1. The formation here is very, very similar to Sanskrit. And in particular, you'll notice that the rules for the gunation of the root vowel are essentially the same as in Sanskrit. If the root ends in a vowel, as in ni, neati, nayati, ni, ne plus ati comes nayati, exactly as in Sanskrit. A verb, a root I should say, with a long vowel in it, like jiv, remains unchanged, no guna there, so just jivati, same as Sanskrit. If it's a root that ends in a consonant cluster, nind, again no gunation, nindati. all these three verbs, nayati, jivati, nindati, identical between Sanskrit and Pali. So I'll skip over the little details because this is just an overall kind of mapping exercise. Actually, what I'm going to do, per Neola follows through classes 1 to 10 in that order. I will follow the same order that we did when I was going through the Sanskrit. In other words, numbers classes 1, 4, 6, and 10, and then the others I'll follow in order. So class 4, that was the one that in Sanskrit you added a y to the root. And this, essentially it's the same in Pali, but what happens is that you get certain necessary phonetic modifications happening. So looking at 4 here, for example, let's look at the root bud. In Sanskrit, you add ya. In Sanskrit, buddhyati. Also it's an atmanepada as well, you can buddhyati or buddhyati. And in Pali, what happens? You get a vowel followed by the dhya, followed by another vowel, so that becomes bujhati. See the consonant, rather than two different consonants remaining, they can merge into one, and because one of them is aspirated, it stays aspirated in Pali. So bujhati. And also we have the root kup. So kupyati, to get angry. Class 4 in Sanskrit. In Pali, what happens? Kuppati. You get a number of verbs in Pali where you have this otherwise unaccountable doubling of the consonant, and it will, in very many cases, be either because it's a class 4 verb or because it's a passive, which actually forms in the same way. It can be a bit ambiguous. For example, show the ambiguity here. Tap, meaning to burn, as a transitive, and you can also have it as a class 1 parasmaipada, tapati in Sanskrit, and you can make a passive out of it, tapyate. It's also a class 4 atmanepada, which will make tapyate. So if you see tapyate in Sanskrit, there's an ambiguity there. Is it the passive of the first of a class 1 verb, or is it the atmanepada of a class 4 verb? There's the ambiguity there. You can't actually tell which except by context. And in Pali, as usual, they both become tapati. Going out of class 6 is in a sense the easiest one of all, because it's where there's no change to the root vowel. Remember that this is the one that in Vedic it had the stress on the end, on the ending. So that's why, for example, let's look at 6. So lik, to write, it's likati. Normally it would be pronounced likati, the way it's Sanskrit and Pali are pronounced now. But remember, it's likati, not lekati, because in Vedic, or even pre-Vedic, the stress was on the ending likati. So, and same, for example, vish, it makes its present. Sorry, all this time I've been forgetting to share my screen. Sorry. Oops. I do apologize for that. Hopefully you'll be able to, this sheet, this set of notes will be there on my what's it called, Google Drive. So hopefully you'll be able to print it off or have it in front of you. Sorry about that. Anyway, basically, as you know, I was just saying, That's just repeating what Perniola was saying there. So, vish. Remember, if this were a class 1 verb, which it is not, it would become veshati. But it's a class 6 verb, so in Sanskrit it is vishati, and in Pali it's reflected as visati. And then to class 10, I'm going to that because it's one of the what the Sanskrit grammarians call the first conjugation, root plus a. Again, that's the one where we have the ayati, or the infix aya, joined to the root, and which in Pali frequently, or more commonly than not, becomes e. So from dish de shayati in Sanskrit, de seti in Pali, from root kri, to do, causative, karayati in Sanskrit, kareti in Pali. Right, so now we go back to the remaining classes, having dealt with 1, 4, 6, and 10. Class 2, that's the one you remember, that was in Sanskrit, it was the ad, for which in Sanskrit, when Macdonnell, for example, used the root dvish as the paradigm, that's where the ending is added directly to the root. For example, root as plus ti, Sanskrit asti, Pali atti. From the root han, in Sanskrit hanti, he kills, not hanati but hanti. Note in particular that there are many verbs which follow one of the what you might call second conjugation classes. Take hanti for an example. Hanma, we kill. Hanan, and hanva, we too kill. Many of these verbs, you have parts of them decline, as conjugate rather, in Pali in the same way as in Sanskrit. But you'll often find that they flip over into being an ordinary a class in Pali. So alongside hanti, you're going to find hanati in Pali. I kill in Sanskrit would be hanmi, but in Pali it is hanami. So we have these verbs here that there's constant tendency in Pali to shift verbs into the simpler, more common a conjugation. So han, hanami, hanasi, hanati, rather than the Sanskrit hanti. And you find some verbs that are just little remnants of them left. Vid is another one. Another class 2 verb. So he knows in Sanskrit is ved plus t. And class 2 has the guna of the root, usually. Vedi becomes goes veti. Now we find veti exists in Pali, but that's the only form in which it still exists in Pali as a class 2 verb. For all of the rest, it's passed over into what Perniola refers to as the 7th class. So vindami. So in Sanskrit it would be vedmi. I know, but it's become what you might call a regular a class verb in Pali. So that's the class 2. There aren't that many of these verbs. I would actually note also this bha, to shine, and to reflect it, in Sanskrit, pratibhati, in Pali, pratibhati, so pratibhati. Kya is another one, to tell or to narrate, as in swakato bhagavata dhammo, and so on. Often used usually with a prefix akka, and so you have akami, I proclaim, akasi, akati. Remember, it's not akasi and akati, no, because the root is ended along a, and the class 2 verb, so akati, akasi, and so on. Now looking at class 3, that's the one that was the hu class, which made juhoti in the strong forms and the juhute in the weak or unstressed forms. Note, by the way, and this would be good news to the Pali students, that in Sanskrit, in these second conjugation verbs, most of them, we had this distinction between the stressed and unstressed, alternatively called the strong and the weak forms. Pali loses that distinction, and it tends to have them all in the strong form, which of course makes it rather easier to learn. So, taking the root hu, juhoti, and in Pali, it is exactly the same in Pali as in Sanskrit. And we have the root ha, to abandon, from hina, and that makes the ha reduplicates with a j, same as in Sanskrit. So we have jahati, he, she, it, abandons. Though Pali also allows, which Sanskrit does not, jahati with a short a. Class 4, we've just dealt with. Class 5 now. Class 5 is this su class, where you have the put in the infix no, so sunoti. Another verb of this class in Sanskrit is shak, meaning to be able. So that makes its third person singular, as you'd expect from a class 5 verb, shaknoti. Pali, of course, doesn't like this kn together, so it'll instead double that k. So that is why you will see sakoti from this class 5 verb. From the root shru, that makes in Sanskrit, it's slightly irregular, because instead of shru noti, the root shortens to just a vocal like r, so shrunoti. That's slight irregularity, otherwise it's regular. So shru, shrunoti, in Pali, sunoti. Now, remember that in Sanskrit, we have the strong and the weak forms. So we here would be shrinoti, shrinuma. This does not happen in Sanskrit, so you get sunoma. This no remains unchanged throughout the conjugation, so sunoma is we hear. We often see the verb papoti from the root ap, meaning to obtain or to get something. It becomes apnoti. Very often, most often, prefixed with a pra in Pali. So pra in Sanskrit, prap noti. N has to be subdotted because there's a r before it and only a p intervening. So prapnoti, that explains this otherwise odd form papoti in Pali. He obtains. Class 6 we've dealt with. That's where the root remains unchanged. Class 7 is a lot simpler in Pali than it is in Sanskrit. You remember that in Sanskrit, it's the Rud class. It inserted either na in the strong form, or just an n in the weak form. So runadhi. And in the Atmanepada, rundhe. No, there's no subdotting of the n after an r if it's directly followed by a dental consonant. Rundhe, no subdotting now. In Pali, the whole thing is much simpler. All that happens is you insert an n into the root and then treat it like an A-class verb. So, for example, you would get in Pali rundhati, not runadhi, this more complex form, but rundhati, which would not be permissible in Sanskrit. And you also get, for example, let's take yuj, to join, as in yoga. That inserts a na. It's a class 7 verb, I should say. So you, na, plus t. What happens now? You can't have a j before a t. So what happens? That becomes yunakti. Yunakti. And in the Atmanepada, the weak form just adds an n. So let me just follow it through for you. Sorry, what am I doing? It would be you plus te, which becomes yunkte. In Pali, again, they don't go into all this complication of yunakti and yunkte and so on. It becomes yunjati. Yunjati, and so on. Bear in mind, there are several verbs, quite a large number of verbs in Sanskrit, that are actually class 6 verbs that insert the nasal. Take, for example, the root krit. It makes its present stem, it's a class 6 verb, not a class 7. So it would be kritati, but it inserts an n. Krintati. There are other verbs as well that do that. For example, sitch, to sprinkle. It's a class C. Sitch, but instead of sitchati that you'd expect, it's sinchati. Much, to liberate. Looking at Sanskrit now, munchati. What has happened with Pali is that rather than following these complexities of the class 7 verbs, rud, runadhi, rundhe, yuj, yunakti, yunkte, and so on, it's just merged this class 7 into these class 6 with an inserted nasal. So it's treated no differently from kantati, sich, sinchati, much, munchati, yuj, yunjati, rud, rundhati. So that makes it a lot easier for the Pali learners. Now to class 8. That is the one that's very like the class 5. Remember, su became sunoti in Sanskrit, and tan, class 8, became tanoti. And that's why if you see these on their own, sunoti, tanoti, you can't tell whether it's a class 5 or a class 8. It could be the root sun, making oti, or root su, making su, noti. You can tell that tanoti is a class 8, not a class 5. But there's another clue there, is because no root whatsoever is allowed to end in a short a. It can end in a short anything else, but there is no root that ends in a short a. If a root ends in an a, it's always a long a. So there's not much to say here. There's the verb, rather, well, exactly the same in Sanskrit. There's only one verb of this class in both Sanskrit and Pali that does not end in a n, and that is kri, to do, where we have both in Sanskrit and Pali karoti. That's a bit of an irregular verb. I won't deal with the complexities of that verb here because it's outside the scope of what we're looking at, which is just a broad overview of the mapping between the classes. Now, class 9. That is where we have the insertion of the na. Remember the word for to buy, kri, becomes krinami. Krinami, krinati, krinasi. The same kind of thing happens in Pali. Let's take the root jñā, to know. That is a class 9 verb in Sanskrit as well as Pali. I'm going to write an incorrect form here deliberately. So jñā, na, ti. It is a regular class 9 verb with the exception that in the present system, this first nya disappears. So the correct form actually is janati. And that's the same in Pali and in Sanskrit. So it's from this root jñā, which is on its own, written as a nya in Pali, and with a preceding vowel, you get the double nya, as would be normal. As in, pradnya becomes in Pali panya. The verbal form of that in Sanskrit is prajanati, and in Pali pajanati. So remember, and it's a very common verb, so remember this well, that it's a regular class 9 verb, but you drop off the nya, not jnanati, it's wrong, but just janati. Now, bear also in mind that many verbs that by rights or in Sanskrit belong to class 5 with the no infix flip to a class 9, a na infix in Pali. So for example, we had, and sometimes it has to do it, sometimes it's optional. So we've just seen Sanskrit prapnoti, he obtains, becomes papoti in Pali. You can also have papunati when u comes in. So as if it's a class 9 verb, which it's not in Sanskrit, but is almost in Pali. So prapnoti, pa punati looks like a class 9 verb. So if you're trying to look that up in Monia Williams under a class 9, you won't find it, or any Sanskrit grammar, because it is class 5 in Sanskrit. So that is the broad overview of the mapping of the verbs, these various classes from Sanskrit to Pali. One thing we should mention that Perniola does mention at page 72 is that a number of verbs belong to different classes. It very often happens in Sanskrit. I think probably more commonly in Sanskrit than in Pali, that you have a verb that will belong to more than one class. He gives some examples on page 82. I'll just look at a couple there. So ji, to conquer, it's a regular class 1 verb in Sanskrit. So gunate the e to a plus ati, and that becomes jayati. Same in Pali, jayati. But it's also in Sanskrit, in Pali, allowed to be a class 9 verb. So ji, nati. I'm just going to check whether it's going to be allowed in Sanskrit. I'm not sure if it is. Let me I'll call it up right here. Ji. So the cursor's got lost again. Here we are. Ji, jayati. Yeah, that's right. It appears it is not attested in Sanskrit as a class 9 verb, just as a class 1 verb, regular, jayati or jayate, not a class 9. There it is. Pali just allows it to be a class 9. And you get other verbs like ved, to say. Sorry, let me show you my iPad again. Oops, where are we? Here we are. Ved. In Sanskrit, just vedati, straight class 1 verb, and Pali, vedati. However, Pali also allows it to be a class 10 verb. So that's why you get vedesi, vedeti, but not in Sanskrit. So hopefully this has given you a helpful overview. So there's no real fear or mystery in all these different classes of verbs and how they map between Sanskrit and Pali. As I say, it's worth making a bit of effort to learn how it works in Sanskrit, and then hopefully everything will become clear when you map the Pali forms onto the Sanskrit. Good, and that's it for this video. Thank you.